Happy Thursday. We're glad you're with us. Lots of familiar. Hey, look at that. Alderman Craig Maladra from the city of Geneva is joining us. That's awesome. Of course, our city administrator, Stephanie Dawkins, as well. Lots of familiar names throughout northeastern Illinois. We're delighted you're with us. Our professor, Mark Pruitt, promised to keep this to less than 4 hours so that we're all back home before any rain/snow events occur.
Only 4.
And Mark, we've already laid down our pre-snow event application on the road, so we're ever so concerned about over-salting, so we use a pre-app that helps us utilize that limited amount of salt that we do use, so that's good.
It works pretty well.
It does work well. It does work well.
And I used to use beet juice for a couple of years.
Remember those days?
Yeah.
Until all the phone calls came saying, "Why is my car turning orange?" Yes.
Was it orange? Okay, I couldn't remember. I knew there was a color. I couldn't.
It was a color of something. Oh my God. Yeah, we just blamed it on St. Charles. So we just.
Fair.
We've got about a couple dozen, at least, folks who have committed to join us today. So we're going to begin in just a moment. I'm going to turn the floor over to my colleague, Cheryl Scott. And then Cheryl is going to turn it over to our professor, Mr. Pruitt. So Cheryl, whenever you're ready, I'm going to yield the floor.
Okay. Yes. Thanks, Kevin. I guess I can mention just an update from the Mayor's Caucus while we wait for a few more people to stroll in. So we have a new webpage up, and I've just entered that in the chat, and I'll share my screen also. And right now we're renting out these energy efficiency games, which you might want for your Earth Day, Arbor Day events, or other community events that you're planning. So we've got this, and just to make sure you can see the screen with the website, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so we do have this spinning wheel with energy efficiency actions on it. And when they spin the wheel, they'll read one of the phrases on these stand-up signs that we've got available for municipalities to borrow. And then that way they can earn a prize based on the color of the action. We've also got this toss game with a light bulb and some earth foam balls. And this is another game where while people are playing the game, they can learn about energy efficiency facts. So if you wanted more information about that, we've got a summary of the games on our website. And then you just need to fill out this form to reserve the game for your upcoming Earth Day events. Thanks.
Thank you, Cheryl. Professor Pruitt.
Yes, sir.
Delighted to see you again, and thank you as always for sharing with us your insight and your expertise. The floor is yours, sir.
Very good. I will go ahead and share my screen. Someone gives me a quick thumbs up.
Let's see.
See if we can do this right.
Looks good. There you go.
There you go.
All right. Very good. Well, welcome everybody. Happy lunch. And this is session 4. This is where we talk about energy policy. And these slides will be made available on the website in case you want to refer to them in the future. So, normal outline for today. Start with a little bit of housekeeping. Talk about some readings and website of the week, including a little bit of hot energy gossip that we'll share with you. And then the lecture itself, talking about policy here at the state and federal level and how those might impact municipalities. And then we'll have discussion at the end. So on the housekeeping, Cheryl just shared with you the energy games. I don't believe there's any other announcements. So I'm just going to go down into the next item, which is our request for specific course items. So as you know, we have for the program our 7 lectures, right? And then we've got a certain amount of time on the back end where we as a group can agree to get together for 10 hours or so to develop some useful energy program ideas, project ideas or the like. So we're inviting people to come forward with, what would be helpful to your community, but also give a mind to, what might be of interest to other communities. So Cheryl was telling me that we've received some ideas from folks who attended last week's session, and we'd like them to keep coming in. Once we get a good look at what is of interest to folks, we'll come back to you during class, maybe next week, maybe the week after, with some proposals, and maybe we'll have a show of hands to see who's interested in what. But some of those ideas might be how to handle franchise agreements, how to manage renewable energy purchasing for municipal facilities, how to optimize and increase participation in utility energy efficiency programs. So it can be anything that is municipally oriented. And the whole idea here is to not only give you all the background in terms of energy policy and how the energy business works, but also to take that knowledge and apply it to something that'll bring some local benefit. So that's the whole idea. And then, as always, recommendations for what we cover in the class and the sessions themselves, always welcome. So thank you again for joining us here today. In terms of resources, the weekly readings, these are not assignments. These are just places you can go to find things that I have found useful in the past. The first is kind of a follow-on to our talking about the wholesale market and how energy is scheduled to match supply and demand. In Northern Illinois, our wholesale market manager is PJM, stands for Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland. It was the original area that the wholesale market participants controlled. Now it's extended all the way out to Northern Illinois. They have the PJM Learning Center. You can click on the link and it will take you to a lot of educational information about how PJM operates, not only from an operation standpoint, but also from a results standpoint. They'll be able to give you excruciating detail in terms of how much energy is being used in the system, its source, the hourly prices. I mean, the whole deal is there. And so your first stop at PJM should probably be the Learning Center and give you a good idea of everything that they do. The next item is more local to Illinois. And this is a source of information from the Illinois Commerce Commission called the ICC Electric Switching Statistics. This is a series of spreadsheets that are updated monthly that give each month's a rundown of each month's number of customers, volume of electricity, number of customers served by retail energy suppliers, all kinds of data broken down on a calendar month basis for each of the utilities, all the Ameren utilities, ComEd, and all the investor-owned utilities. So this gives you a sense of what's going on in terms of energy patterns month to month, how many consumers are purchasing from a retail energy supplier versus taking default service, how many consumers of a certain size are taking hourly energy service. So for those of you who really want to get into the raw data, this is a good place to go. And it goes back for years. So if you've got an intern with nothing to do, you could put together a longitudinal record of energy consumption in the ComEd region. And maybe that informs some of your energy benchmarking or baseline analysis. Now, this is at the ComEd level, not down at the municipal level, but you operate within ComEd, so it's a good place to start. Last item here is something that is more of a reference document. I know that a number of the municipal staff that I've worked with over the years, they tend to get questions from residents looking for recommendations. Which energy supplier should I use? And I think that there's always this reluctance to guide residents to a specific consumer or a specific provider. I'm sorry. This list from the Illinois Commerce Commission as well, it's called the ICC Customer Complaint Statistics. It's a monthly report, and it registers the number of complaints for every retail energy supplier. There's another one for retail gas suppliers as well, of all the consumer complaints against those suppliers. And it assigns a 5-star rating system to every retail energy supplier. And it makes it very easy for the consumer to go on that list and say, okay, how many complaints does supplier ABC have, and is that the right type of customer? Am I the right type of customer for that supplier? So this might be a way of getting out of the middle of trying to recommend a retail energy supplier. You can simply say, well, there are a number of retail energy suppliers. You might want to just inform yourself. So this is even more specific than the Better Business Bureau, and it might be a nice way to provide some information to your consumers and your residents, and kind of be able to make it fast and easy to convey that information. So I hope those are helpful. If not, we'll tune in next week and we'll have another set of 3 readings that hopefully will be of value to you. Moving on to our website of the week. A number of you might already be involved with or know of Desire USA. Desire is an acronym. It stands for Database of State Incentives for Renewables and Efficiency, DSIRE. It's put together by the North Carolina Clean Technology Center at North Carolina State University, I believe. You see the link here. And what's pretty cool about this is that this group pulls together a lot of information about renewables and energy efficiency policies throughout the United States. So federal, state, and sometimes even local information can be gleaned from this site, kind of all in one place. So if you're looking for ideas in terms of program development, or you want to see, okay, well, what's our baseline set of policies here in Illinois? You can go to Desire, click on Illinois in their map, and you'll start the drill down process. Every state, once you click through, has a series of policy incentives that that Desire has aggregated and isolated into various verticals. So for Illinois, you see here there are 17 appliance and equipment efficiency standards. You can open up that box and see what those standards are. You can see that there are 6 bond programs that have been identified. You can, again, open up that drawer and see what Desire has identified. When you get into the drawer, it'll give you a lot of reference links back to the original legislation, links to the programs, some idea of budget, and it gives just a load of information all in one place. So this is a great way to force multiply your efforts in tracking, maintaining, and then building on your own energy policy ideas. So that's why I thought this is helpful. Desire also provides links. So not only do they drill down and provide the information for individual existing programs, they provide links to national, federal, state, regional, international organizations that are all involved in energy, renewable energy and energy efficiency specifically. And you can click through to find out what those organizations are saying. So examples are the Alliance to Save Energy and the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy. These are 2 nonprofits that are regularly involved at the state level for developing state level energy efficiency policy. So these are folks that probably have additional research, additional white papers, position papers, recommendations, staff, presentations. I mean, these are folks who are really deeply involved in the energy efficiency and renewable energy sector, and they can be another resource to you. So again, some of you might already be aware of this. Maybe this is a refresher for those that have not knocked around on Desire. You know, this very well could be a good use of your time. So I hope that's helpful. Let's move on to the lecture for today. And we're going to be talking about energy policy. Now, I know a lot of people look at policy or they hear, we're going to talk policy, boring. That's the response of my family. But policy is where a lot of things really come together for making a change, right? Policy is basically, in my mind, it's an idea, right? And it's a little bit more than an idea. An idea fits on a bumper sticker. A policy should probably move beyond that. You know, we want 25% renewable by 2025. Okay, that's a good start, right? But a good policy has some objectives, right? What you get to 25% by 2025, that's great. What do you do in the meantime, right? There's this timeliness issue, meaning that when do we start? And then when do we review the policy? You know, there's a lot of policies out there that probably would be much better if they were sunsetted every 5 or 6 years, and the policymakers had to review that policy in order to expand it, amend it, and extend it, right? So it's not just a one-time deal, but good policy has a timeline. There's some metrics, right? How do we measure this, and what are we measuring? When do we measure it? Who measures it? What happens if we don't hit those goals? You know, those are all good things to identify in your policy. And then process, right? Who does what when? And if you have these essential ingredients to a policy, that's a great start. But remember that energy policy doesn't exist in a vacuum. Just because you want it doesn't mean it's going to happen, right? So you need to enable that policy with regulation. So think about policy as being kind of the direction we want to go. We want to get from Chicago to LA, right? Perfect. We want to do it in the month of April. Fine. We want the trip to take, no more than 2 weeks. Perfect. Okay. Those are good policies. Regulation is where you get down to the detail. And regulation is typically handled by folks who are not the policymakers. Many times policymakers are the elected officials, and regulations come from staff, right? Municipal staff, in the case of folks who are on the call today. So regulation many times has to be drafted through a rules-making process. Maybe it goes back to the policymakers for approval, kind of like in Illinois. Energy policy is promulgated in the legislature, approved by the governor, goes to the regulatory entities, Illinois Power Agency, where I used to work, Illinois Commerce Commission, Department of Commerce Economic Opportunity. Those entities write rules that are designed to impose and enforce the policy. Those rules go back to JCAR, the Joint Committee on Administrative Rulemaking, which is made up of the legislators. Once JCAR has approved the policies, then the policies are implemented. So there's a lot of back and forth between the policymakers and the regulation. But to focus on regulation and regulators right now, a lot of good regulation requires disclosure, right? Information. Who are the market participants? What do they do? What's their level of involvement in the policy, in fulfilling the policy objectives and the like? So disclosures and information are important. Permissions, right? Think about building permits are a great example that you can't close up the walls in this house until you have an inspection, right? That inspection needs to be conducted by a village staffer, right? And that needs to have a formal sign off before closing up the walls. Same thing here. If you're going to have permissions for your regulation, you need to have that explicit, and you need to say who's going to sign off, what is the document they're going to sign, who gets access to that document, what's the time limit. There's also evaluation. From time to time, good regulators go back and they say, how close are we to meeting goal? Maybe it's done annually, maybe it's done every other year. But a lot of those reports are made public, and they go back to the policymakers to let them know, okay, well, you told us you wanted this policy, we wrote these rules, this is how we're performing against the benchmarks that you set forth. And then there's enforcement sometimes. Sometimes there's penalties for non-compliance. Other times there's not. So penalties tend to focus attention in the energy sector, renewable energy. Many times there is an enforcement mechanism at the state level. If a regulated entity does not meet its goals, they must pay a fine. Sometimes that fine has a nicer name on it, something like a alternative compliance payment, but it's still a fine. And so those are all parts of regulation. Lastly, policy and regulation, they interact a lot, but both of those also interact with the market. And the market is important because if policy and regulation is written without consideration of markets and how markets work and who is in the market, you're going to have a policy that makes no sense and doesn't move forward. Here's an example. Illinois has a clean coal portfolio standard on the books. I believe it was put on the books in 2008, if I recall correctly. And it called for 25% of the power supplied in Illinois to come from clean coal resources. But that policy was written without regard to how the energy market in Illinois works. What they wanted, what the policymakers wanted in the policy, doesn't exist in the market. That's not, the market can't deliver what the policymakers said they wanted. As a consequence, all these years later, policy is still on the books. In fact, there's probably some regulation on it as well, but it can't be executed because no one provides what that policy is asking for. So I'm not saying that you can only write policies based on what the market provides. I'm just saying that if you write the policy without regard to what the market provides, you might be sitting for a long, long time before you can see progress towards your policy goal. So markets have a commodity, right? Something's being purchased. There's market participants, buyers and sellers. There are terms of the contract, right? And then there's price discovery. Those are all primary market functions. So all of these have to fit together in order to have a successful policy. And where they overlap are points of potential friction. So minimizing friction is what the planning process is supposed to do, right? Can the regulators track and analyze market development without stifling innovation and competition, right? That's the regulatory and marketplace overlap. Can policymakers articulate objectives that fit within what the market is providing? That's the policy and market overlap. And then lastly, do the policymakers allow the regulators the latitude to write rules that actually enforce enforce the policy and bring the policy together and move it forward, right? So all these are potential points of failure, I guess is what I'm saying. And good policy acknowledges this and it arrives at policies that are aligned. How do they do that? Well, they look at context, right? What's the history and the politics and public opinion about this particular policy? How's it going to play? Is this pushing new ideas, or is it enforcing an existing market reality, right? And then analysis. It would be best if, when dealing in energy policy, if you had a little bit of data, if you could count on some original sources for your data, and if you built some methods around analyzing that data. Math is hard, I understand, but math is an integral part here because consumer costs are a surefire flashpoint for pushback on any policy. So just encourage you to look at that. So where does all this happen? Well, in theory, it's part of the legislative process, right? The legislation that's developed at the federal level is the process is identified in this document. So, we all seen, Schoolhouse Rock, and we understand how a bill becomes law, and we have some derivation of this at the local level. But just bear in mind that the process isn't there to speed things up. The process is actually in place to slow things down. I would say most legislative processes are there to slow things down to an extent that you get more input on those friction points. Market, regulation, policy. In an ideal world, that's what happens. This is also a very conservative process that I think is designed to weed out bad ideas, right? So in this process, if you can structure it in a way where you get lots of input, every bit of input, even though it's complicating the issue, every bit that comes in is actually going to, I think, increase the chances of having a good policy, because you have more people saying, well, what if, and it's that those what ifs that are going to inform your process and, again, hopefully yield a better final policy. So that's the theory, right? Let's talk about the environment and what we actually are contending with here in Illinois from an energy policy standpoint. So this is a diagram from a prior session that we've had, and this is the regulatory compact in Illinois. So in Illinois, the primary state policy regarding utilities is the Public Utility Act, the PUA. You see it's hyperlinked up at the top, and if you want to read that statute in its full amended version, go ahead and click there, and you've got access to the full thing. Now, it's a little dry, I'll give you that. So if here's the diagram that gives us a sense of what's going on within that Public Utility Act. The Public Utility Act outlines the energy policy in Illinois that the Public Utility Commissions, they're in the center of the process, balances the interests of the community and the utility to optimize the value for both parties. So remember, the regulatory compact was, let's grant a monopoly to the utilities so that we have greater efficiency in the provision of utility services to consumers. Remember, before the utilities, there were energy companies that were competing, and remember all the wires and inefficiency of investment. Well, the regulatory compact is here to alleviate that by providing that monopoly to the utility. Utility then gets firm revenue stream. They're not looking over their shoulders at competing entities. They get steady profits. When they spend dollars to improve the system, they know they're going to get those dollars back plus a return. That leads to lower debt costs, and it increases dividends to investors, right? So they can raise capital whenever they need, and it provides them with this ability to establish eminent domain if they need to cut across property to operate their system, right? So the utility gets all those benefits. On the community side, what do the consumers get? Well, they get a level of operating and financial transparency. There are these rate cases that the Public Utility Commission requires whenever the utility wants to change prices, right, for the regulated entity. To the extent you're patient enough, you can go and find out all the details of how the utility is operating, because they are a state recognized monopoly. In return for that monopoly, they need to provide full transparency in terms of their operations. They need, the community and consumers are supposed to get reasonable rates. They're supposed to get a high level of reliability. They're supposed to have safety, right? And then infrastructure investment. And all these things are going to benefit the consumers, because now we have access to steady, reliable electricity at the lowest possible rate. So that's the Public Utility Act in Illinois. Lots of details, but this is the basic construct. So when we think about energy policy at the municipal level, it has to be done in the context that if we're going to do anything or request anything of Commonwealth Edison utility is going to be somewhat constrained in what they can do by the Public Utility Act. If we want to affect a policy change regarding a utility, we need to go to the Public Utility Commission, because the Public Utility Commission is the entity that is empowered to order the utility to do certain things, right? So that's just the connective tissue here in this overall system. The other item in the Public Utility Act, again, we're going back to a diagram from a prior presentation, but just to underscore this, regulated utilities get their profits by charging rates that are sufficient to give them to cover their pass-through expenses, which are in green here, their total expenses off to the left, those are pass-through. The markup that the utility makes is not on electricity, it's on their rate base. The rate base is the gross value of all of the poles, wires, substations, equipment that the utility owns. So if a utility owns an asset, that asset is included in rate base. That rate base, the value of that rate base is multiplied by a rate of return, 9%, 10%, 11%. And that's the profit. That's what the utility, where the utility makes their money. So it's very important to think about the Public Utility Act as a mechanism that allows the utility to make money. If you want to get the utility's attention, you provide them with an opportunity to increase their fixed assets, which will increase their rate base, which, when that rate base is multiplied by the rate of return, will increase their return on rate base and will lead to their total revenue requirement, right? So now you know what the utility is looking for. Utility is not necessarily looking for more electricity flowing through their lines. That's not the game at all. The game is what equipment and what can go into that rate base. So again, if you are writing or considering local policy on utility, you need to, or energy policy, you need to, and it's going to engage with utility, you need to understand what are the drivers of the utility. and that's all settled in the Public Utility Act. So that's a Public Utility Act. That's how the utilities operate. And the utilities, investor-owned utilities in Illinois are wires companies. They have nothing to do with the power plants. So if you're thinking about power generation, you need to look at the Illinois Electric Service Customer Choice and Rate Relief Act of 1997, also called the Choice Act. Not a good acronym to be built there, but the Choice Act is what allows retail energy suppliers and independent power producers like Exelon, NRG, and Calpine to sell electricity into the wholesale market and then to resell that electricity down to the consumer. I'm not going to go through all this again. We talked about this in an earlier session, but if you are thinking about, wow, I really want to have more renewable electricity or clean electricity for myself, my municipal operations, or my residents, that clean renewable electricity is going to, based on the Choice Act, have to be produced by an independent power producer, not the utility. That independent power producer is going to have to move that electricity through the RTO, Regional Transmission Organization, also known as PJM, right? That electricity is going to have to be delivered down to the local utility company, Commonwealth Edison, and then to the actual consumer, the retail leg of that transaction. In the mix here, though, you're probably going to need to have a retail electricity supplier, a RES or an ARES, involved in that deal, right? So it's not, again, it's to make a policy that says we want 100% clean energy, that's laudable, but it would be a better informed policy if you took into account where that electricity had to be generated and how it's delivered and who are going to be parties to that transaction. Not going to be the local utility. Local utility delivers this electricity that is secured from independent power producers, but you're probably going to go through a retail electricity supplier as your market intermediary, right? So kind of practical nuts and bolts, block and tackle in terms of how you're going to arrange your retail supply contracts. You also have in Illinois, the Illinois Power Agency Act, the IPA Act. So the IPA is basically a procurement agency. The IPA is responsible for procurement around the energy supply for consumers that choose not to have a retail energy supplier. The IPA also is the procurement agency for renewable energy that is secured by the investor-owned utilities. And the IPA Act, for all the detail, really does this, right? What you see here in the diagram. They are a planning and procurement entity. They are not buying anything, so don't equate procurement to buying anything. The IPA runs a process where they receive information from the utilities regarding energy consumption requirements for it's called the default portfolio, those consumers who choose not to use a retail energy supplier. The IPA issues a draft procurement plan, the public comments on that plan, the IPA revises their plan, it goes through the ICC process, a case at the ICC. At the end, the ICC approves or amends or rejects the IPA plan, and then the IPA schedules and holds procurement events. The procurement events are bidding events. Any entity selected to be a supplier to the utilities through an IPA event enter into that contract with utilities, right? So the IPA, that state entity, is not buying anything. They're just setting up a process whereby suppliers of renewable energy, standard energy capacity are selected and then enter into into agreements with the utility. So this is probably going to change over time, according to some of the rumors that are out there. But for right now, the IPA is important because people think, oh, well, if we're going to have a renewable energy goal for our municipality, that's great. But just remember that the IPA, one of the IPA's missions is to secure electricity for the utilities, or I'm sorry, renewable energy credits for the utilities. And you're going to have to decide, are the credits that are secured by the utilities through the IPA process part of your compliance, right? you want to have 100% renewable by 2050, that's fine. Are you going to count the renewable energy credits that are secured through the IPA process purchased by ComEd, subject to the state's RPS policy? It's a fair question, right? If you decide that you want to include that in your goal, great, that means you have to procure less. If you seek to exclude that from your goal, well, now you have to procure more renewable energy to meet your goal. So this is important stuff that's operating in the background. There's the Electric Infrastructure and Modernization Act that I think was passed in 2010. This was legislation and eventually statute that was supposed to streamline rate making for the utilities, and it was based on a formula rate. And the formula was, if the utility identified infrastructure to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, called FERC Form 1, if you look all the way over on the right, see for April 1, utility files investment plan based on FERC Form 1. If basically this process said, if FERC says it's an appropriate capital expense by the utility, the ICC needs to approve it as an approved capital expense as well. So this entire new process was meant to do a few things. One, it was supposed to accelerate the rate making process from a multi-year to less than 1 year process at the Illinois Commerce Commission. It also greatly limited the ability of the Illinois Commerce Commission to examine the appropriateness or the prudency of certain utility expenditures. And it required the ICC basically to rubber stamp whatever was the utility filed with the federal government, right? So pluses and minuses, right? And you might not recognize performance-based formula rate making, but you might recognize some of the outcomes of this. So this bill was passed in Springfield in 2010, 2011 period, and has been in place ever since this past year. So it had a 10-year lifespan. So when we take a look at this policy from a backward-looking basis, the Illinois Public Interest Research Group found that EIMA was responsible for ComEd customers paying 37% more for delivery service than they did in 2011. That's between 2012 and I think 2020, ComEd customers paid a total of $4.7 billion more than they would have under the prior rate making process. And that of that $4.7 billion that were additional dollars collected from ComEd consumers, 1 billion of those $4.7 billion were basically profits to ComEd. So policy matters, right? You might also, if you weren't aware of the Illinois PIRG study, you might have seen some headlines in the past year or so about what the U.S. Attorney discovered about the EIMA and how that policy came about. You see the headline down at the bottom here. Commonwealth Edison, actually it was Exelon, agrees to pay $200 million to resolve federal criminal investigation into bribery. The alleged bribery was related to the passage of the EIMA. So this is just a cautionary tale, right? To just be very careful in the energy policy arena, to just observe that people who bring energy policies forward sometimes see that as an opportunity to make some profit. The profit's bad, but the process of getting there really needs to be able to pass an ethical standard that all other policy making must adhere to. So those are in the past. More recently, we had the Future Energy Jobs Act passed, and this was in late 2016 under the Rauner administration. And the Future Energy Jobs Act had some key components. They're listed here. They increased the funding levels for utility programs to from about $350 million a year statewide to over $500 million a year. And it allowed the utilities to include those energy efficiency programs in their rate base. Remember, going back to the rate base and what the utility wants? Well, this was a big benefit to the utilities, because now that $500 million that's spent each year on energy efficiency now is included as rate base to the utilities, and they receive a return on those programs. There were changes to the renewable portfolio standard, and it moved how the IPA, or what the IPA procures, from simply buying renewable energy credits from wind resources throughout the Midwest to having specific carve-outs for rooftop, community, brownfield solar, low to moderate income programs, solar for all. And all of this needs to be done under long-term contracts with resources that are primarily located in state. So that the policy objective here was to not just improve the renewable energy standard or increase the output, but it was also to localize this. So there was this jobs building component of FEJA. On the nuclear side, there were subsidies for quote unquote unprofitable nuclear assets. And those purchases will continue for a period of 10 years of zero emissions credits from existing power plants in the Quad Cities and downstate Clinton, Illinois. And then there were jobs and consumer assistance, so about $750 million in job training support. So a lot of things happened in FEJA in 2016. And then come 2021, we had the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, CEJA. And I'm not going to read this slide to you. It's a 900-page bill. We've touched on some of these elements in the past, but what I thought was informative here is that the energy bills, the energy policymaking process in Illinois has extended beyond simple issues of who's earning what on rate of return and who's running the procurement process. It's really started to mushroom into issues around equity and electric vehicles and the transition, right, from carbon-based resources to non-carbon-based resources. There's also an ethics element in CEJA, so we'll see how all that works out. But these bills are getting bigger and bigger, more involved, more detailed. In one sense, that provides more opportunities for municipalities to gain some leverage for local policy development. On the other side, some of these are constraints, right? And you have to operate and build your own policy in the context of all these other requirements, right? Because local policy does not trump state energy policy, right? You just have to operate within this environment, and the environment has multiple layers. That's the point. So let's talk about recent federal policies. The two that I focus on here in this table are the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. You see here on the far left, the inclusion, or what is the topic that's covered. And there are others in here, but electric vehicles, ships and buses, transit, electric grid, homes, pollution and justice, and on that at the state level as well, and agricultural and forestry. You see that there are, in each of these bills that were passed at different times by Congress, they both address or have presence in each of these inclusion sectors, and they each have a budget, right? So again, maybe this provides some opportunity to the municipality to say, okay, well, we're interested in electric vehicles. Is there anything in the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act or the Inflation Reduction Act for my charging infrastructure, right? Or are there additional funds for energy efficiency or weatherization for residents in my community? So I think at the federal level, I think it's more about tracking and accessing programs that are funded by the federal policy, and a little bit less about whether these are constraints, but federal policy extends beyond these as well. The operation of the wholesale marketplace, interstate transmission, all those things are handled at the federal level. But these are two new opportunities that you may want to consider when you're thinking about your policy creation. Something that I think is really important for those municipalities that are focused on renewables are the credits around the investment tax credit. So when a renewable energy project, let's say a rooftop solar project, is proposed, that rooftop project, the cost of that solar array, the the racking, the panels, the inverters, the wiring, the interconnection with the meter at the building. All of those have a cost, right? They have a capital cost. In the past, 30% or 26%, there was a step down, but 26 to 30% of those capital costs were recoverable by the owner of the asset through the investment tax credit. The investment tax credit was granted through the Internal Revenue Service, and it was a dollar for dollar tax credit. So if you spent $1 million on your rooftop solar array, you would be eligible for up to $300,000 of investment tax credits. Those investment tax credits could be used to offset your own personal tax obligations, federal tax obligations, or they could be sold to a bank or to some other entity that had a tax obligation. So this was a big part of how these projects got built in the past. In the past, before the Infrastructure Reduction Act, only tax eligible entities could get the investment tax credit. Non-eligible entities could not. So a nonprofit, a church, a municipality, even a library, even schools could not receive these tax credits because they did not pay federal tax. Well, things have now changed a little. One, under the IRA, is that investment tax credit has now been increased back up to the 30%. It's been extended to account for costs that are related to the solar array, but also to battery storage. You see that about halfway down this chart here. So if you want to have battery storage to augment and support your facility and the solar array, that's eligible for the investment tax credit now. Additionally, now rooftop and community solar for nonprofits, as well as battery storage for nonprofits, including municipalities, can now receive not a tax credit, but a rebate. They can receive a rebate, a direct payment through the Internal Revenue Service for the 30% of their project costs. So now this is found money. And what this does for a municipality is that in the past, to get the benefit of the investment tax credit, the municipality pretty much had to hire or select a solar developer who would own the solar array and sell the electricity to the municipality. And it would be up to the private sector solar developer to apply for and receive the investment tax credit and to pass that along to the municipality. Not very transparent. Well, now municipalities can receive that rebate directly. They can see exactly what they applied for. They can see exactly what they received. Higher level of transparency. And it's a way to finance projects that maybe now municipality would want to purchase and own the solar array. Maybe they want to contract out its maintenance, but ownership now becomes a lot more viable. So this is called direct pay. And all we're doing here under direct pay is making a more direct access to incentives, federal incentives in this case, the investment tax credit, to municipalities. That's it. No magic. It's just a minor adjustment in the statute, but it could have a major impact on the affordability of solar, wind, other types of renewable energy projects for municipalities. So there's a lot of detail here. I don't want you to think it's a home run. Still a lot of work to be done to get your investment tax credit or a production tax credit. Most solar projects do investment tax credit, so that's why we focused on that. But these might be opportunities not only for the municipality, but could serve as training opportunities within your community. This is also just one of many incentives that can be stacked up to reduce the cost of on-site renewables for municipalities. At the federal level, there's the investment tax credit. There's also accelerated depreciation of assets. At the state level, there's the sale of your renewable energy credits. There's the inverter rebate from the utilities. There's just a lot of elements that go into project financing. This is one. It's major though, and it's something you might want to consider moving forward. So with that, we're open to the discussion, and I'll stop sharing, and happy to spend the last 5-10 minutes with everybody fielding questions and opening up for discussion.
Thank you very much, Mark. Questions or comments from anyone? Edith and Cheryl will monitor the chat, and if anyone has a question, raise your hand or just jump in, if you will.
So there are not yet questions in the chat. We absolutely invite those. But I am wondering if we could entertain some questions that I have. Of course, the Mayor's Caucus works a lot with the utilities, and we have some programs that are funded. So if the chair allows here, may I ask some questions just about the overarching Public Utilities Act and how that filters down a little bit. So my first question, so we've got Illinois Commerce Commission, which is our Public Utility Commission in a regulatory role, yet we experience them a fair amount as both an advocate and an educator. So Mark, I see the ICC speaking out on behalf, and I'll use just the low income energy efficiency. So if we go to something called the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, and Mark, you might explain what that's about. And why that Stakeholder Advisory Committee, or you talked about acronyms, it's called SAG. And those meetings are an absolute riot, which Mark can talk a little bit more about. They last 2 days, I'm not joking, and there are hundreds of people there. But talk to me about, or I guess talk to the group a little bit about SAG and why the ICC maybe steps over the line a little bit as an advocate.
Right. I think that's a good point, and that reminds me of the piece of hot gossip I was going to share.
Yes, I wondered if I missed it, because I wasn't titillated, and I went like, maybe it wasn't as hot as you had promised, but yes.
Oh,
please.
no. In the energy world, this is hot.
Okay.
So the Illinois Commerce Commission has the 5 commissioners, right? They are kind of like judges, and they're the ones who render final decisions on cases. Then below them are the staff, and that's administrative law judges and subject matter experts, and all kinds of people over there. So the commissioners are appointed by the governor and then confirmed by the Illinois Senate. Right now, we're supposed to have 5. Right now, we have 4, and one of those 4, their term is actually expired. So there's been a lot of watching and waiting, who's going to be the new commissioners, and possibly who will be the new chairperson of the Illinois Commerce Commission. Currently, Carrie Zalewski is the chair. So the hot gossip is that there are 2 names that the governor has selected. They both have a lot of depth in the Illinois energy market, and their names are supposed to be released yet this week, was my understanding, and will go to the Senate for confirmation. One of the members, one of the names is supposed to be someone who's been in state government before, and just like one of our other commissioners, Ann McCabe. She's been on the Commerce Commission before. She's there for her 2nd visit. We're going to possibly see a name released that should be fairly familiar to folks in the municipal sector, as they've served in the past. So that's the hot gossip. Okay. But it leads to your question in terms of, well, sometimes the ICC is an advocate, right? And that's why the commissioners are critical. What is their focus? If you have a commissioner who is really focused on is very sensitive to the interest of power producers, well, they're going to come at all these cases with that perspective in mind, right? That doesn't mean that they're anti-consumer. It just means that they have a deeper appreciation of a certain thing, right? So a lot of times you'll hear about commissioners being, oh, well, they're a consumer advocate commissioner, or they're an industry commissioner, or they're a so-and-so, right? And it's a way of shorthanding people and saying, okay, their perspective is probably going to focus on X or Y or Z. So it's really important to get that right mix. Formally, you're the only constraint is they must be residents of Illinois, and there can be no more than 3 of a single political party on the commission at any given time. But balancing the kind of sensitivities and expertise, that's also a big part of the commission, because again, it's a process. It's supposed to tumble around these ideas and concepts to ensure that a good policy comes about. So how is the ICC an advocate? Well, the ICC is technically a regulator, but they are a regulator that under the Public Utility Act is granted a lot of latitude in certain areas to make decisions and adopt positions. So things like the SAG, the Stakeholder Advisory Group, a good example. Energy efficiency is so broad, so complex, and highly individualized that policymakers in Springfield can't necessarily come up with every scenario. They can't go in and identify this is how you're going to run your light bulb program, right? They're going to allow the ICC to say, should we have a light bulb program? What should it look like? What should it spend? And who should be eligible, right? And there's many other programs beyond light bulbs, but I think most people are familiar with the light bulbs. So the ICC many times, instead of them just talking to themselves or just talking to the utilities, they will open up and have stakeholder groups. And the Stakeholder Advisory Group is one of these. And it's been in place, Edith, 5 years, 6 years, probably more. And it's a big deal because you've got the utilities who are very interested in this because there's $500 million a year of new rate base that if they are successful in deploying those funds and getting the results that they're supposed to, they earn a profit and they earn a bonus on that profit, right? If they exceed their goals. So lots of utility interest here. There are the policy advocates who want to see the benefits of what's going on in the overall energy sector in Illinois. So people with low to moderate income focus, government, business, there's all the user groups should be involved here because again, $500 million a year is a lot to be invested and people want to say, look, this is what we need, right? We need a light bulb program to look like this to be able to work for us. And then there's the technology people. The people actually provide the controls and, there's the Sylvania is going to be in there for the light bulbs. You're going to have Google, you're going to have all the people who are in that supply chain for energy efficiency technologies that also want to know what's coming next and to advocate for their position. So the SAG is a way to get input into the ICC to staff so that staff can then communicate that up to the commissioners so that when an energy efficiency docket comes before the commission, that they are well informed of all the options, that they know that there have been ample opportunity for individual parties to ask questions and make their point made. And it's, again, it's just another way of improving that policymaking process by inviting and soliciting inputs from various stakeholders. So I hope that wasn't too generic, but that's kind of where the ICC comes in. IPA does something very similar. They don't have a formal ongoing process, but you'll see many times they will ask for public comment on, hey, this is how we're going to operate the Illinois Solar for All program. What does the industry think? The SAG, much more public than and formalized than the Illinois Power Agency, but similar processes for a separate though related utility regulator in the state.
Thank you, Mark. That was great. I'm going to put the SAG link in the chat. And just a note, that has been a group that has been open to anyone. If you do have 10 hours or so.
Lots of time.
at a time the Mayor's Caucus tried to stay engaged on behalf of municipalities, and it was kind of soul crushing, I think is the way Mark described the SAG meetings, was soul crushing. But I'm going to turn it over to Kyra because she's got a great question she wants to ask you.
Thanks so much, Edith. And thanks, Mark, again, for a good presentation, chock full of great information. And so I even feel a little bad asking such a minor question. Do you remember this offhanded comment that you made on this one slide? But you were articulating that there may be some things changing about the relationship between the IPA and ICC during your IPA overview slide. So I think that's around 19 or 20. And I just didn't catch what about that flow chart or about how those pieces dance with one another may be changing in that anticipated time frame.
Right. I was merely giving an oblique reference. You didn't miss anything. It's just an oblique reference that the IPA sits beneath the Executive Ethics Commission, not the governor. And the Executive Ethics Commission is now interviewing for a new IPA director. So that's a change. And secondly, in Springfield, there's about 2 dozen, maybe 3 dozen now, energy bills that are kicking around out there. And in that discussion, so lots of new ideas of, well, we need to do better planning for infrastructure. We need to do better planning for reliability. All these things that are now kind of bubbling up to the surface, like maybe PJM shouldn't be the one ultimately responsible for power plant operation selection in Northern Illinois. That's a key question. Maybe we need to kind of reconfigure how Illinois engages with the wholesale energy market. And some of those discussions are, okay, well, who's going to do that? And my hunch, I haven't seen anything, but my hunch is that the IPA, the ICC will probably have some enhanced rules if these pieces of legislation move, right? This year, next year, the year after. We just had a great big energy bill, so I don't know if there's much appetite amongst the policymakers to do anything this year. But there's enough warning signals out there in the wholesale energy market around reliability that I think the policymakers, particularly policymakers from downstate Illinois, are very concerned. And they think, okay, we haven't had, for instance, an integrated resources plan in Illinois for over 25 years, right? That's where you have somebody sit down and say, okay, well, what are we going to need and what do we have and how do we, fill in the middle? No one's done that for over 2 decades. I mean, a generation's gone by in Illinois. So maybe somebody should do that. We'll see.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, we'll see. Thanks so much.
We've got one more question in the chat, which is going to be a quick one. If people need to go, they can. And then we wanted to make just an announcement, invite folks to the next Environment Committee meeting. So Ivy, are you on to make a quick request about the investment tax credits?
Yeah, thanks, Edith. Mark, I just wanted to ask if that 30% rebate for the battery and solar facility, how long will that go on for? Is there like a certain pot of money that's gonna, eventually run out, or will that rebate extend over the course of X amount of years?
It will extend. It's federal, right? Okay. And so it's not tied to the renewable energy credits budget in Illinois or anything like that. So it's federal. It's ongoing. I believe it does step down in the future. So early adoption is probably best. Additionally, and if you go back to the slide that kind of was the busy detail on the investment tax credit, you saw that it starts at 6%, but then if you use US components and then pay prevailing wage and then meet other conditions, you can build up your ITC to 30%. So it's really important to understand that to get to the 30, you need to meet certain parameters. There's no free money, it always comes with strings. So that's one thing. The second thing I would mention is that, and I hear about King County and solar a lot, so I'm just going to put this out there for you. At the federal level, getting that ITC extended to not just solar, but also batteries is really pivotal, because at the local level for ComEd, there's the solar paired with storage tariff that hasn't been used very much, but what it allows for is a lower cost to interconnect your battery storage. And it allows for accounts to use that storage to basically reduce their peak demand and really reduce their wholesale energy charges. So if it's configured correctly, you can really leverage up your cost avoidance. Solar will do a good job, but bringing on the storage will bring about a better level of resiliency and cost leveraging to get more benefit out of that solar array. So I really encourage any entity that's looking at doing rooftop solar or has done rooftop solar to take another look at maybe putting solar on that existing resource or to pair it with your new resources, because it's a real accelerator for value.
And Mark, irrespective of whether it's on a building, a standalone solar array, that's your same advice.
Correct.
Okay. Quick question for you that was texted to me with respect to municipally owned utilities. That 30% tax credit applies to building owners, residents, etc., even within an MOU?
I'd have to, I'm not an attorney, but a couple of things I do know is that the investment tax credit is always granted to the owner of the system. It is extended not only to behind the meter, but also specifically calls out community solar projects.
Okay.
And so that would lead me to believe that, yes, even a municipally owned or cooperative owned
Right.
facility would be eligible.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Cheryl, I know that you want to brag about our next Environment Committee meeting, which is about geothermal. Most of you should have received an email under my signature regarding our next meeting. So is there anything you want to add or amplify, Cheryl?
Well, I've put some of the meeting information in the chat, so
Sorry.
it'll be a geothermal 101, which we thought might be interesting to the Energy Academy group if you're not already receiving those invitations. And we'll have some other information. We'll speak to a homeowner about someone who's actually installed a geothermal system. We'll also be talking about permitting a little bit, and then we'll hear about a group buy program, which will make it more affordable for homeowners who are interested in installing geothermal.
Great. Any other pressing questions, Edith? Or if not, a huge thank you to all of you again for spending your lunch hour with us. Professor Pruitt, thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone. Be safe.